Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Emma. I am a bookseller at Belmont Books located in Belmont, Massachusetts. We're a small independent bookstore, and we're so excited to have you guys here. Just a quick little housekeeping. You can ask questions of our authors and our other panelists in the chat function, which is to the right of your screen. There's also a Q&A question button at the bottom of your screen should you decide to ask a question there. So let me tell you about a few events we have coming up. Next week, we have a virtual event with Kathleen Collins in conversation with Matthew Gilbert, who is a TV reviewer at Boston Globe. And on Wednesday, we have Abby Jimenez in conversation with Emily Henry, and those are both romance authors, and they're both very cool, and we're very excited to have everyone coming in. So make sure to check out our other events if you like this one. This one is going to be very fun. So let me introduce Michelle and Randy and also Lorene. So Lorene Hoover is a fiction writer, essayist, playwright, and poet. Her work has appeared in Thelma Literary Journal, Rosebud Journal, the Christian Science Monitor, the Des Moines Register, and in the anthology Grandparents Cry Twice, Help the Bereaved Grandparents, among other publications. She grew up near Centerville, Iowa, and currently lives in Ames and winters in Fountain Hills, Arizona. She enjoys book clubs, leisurely walks, ice cream, a working television, a good view out her window, and music. Milk Without Honey is her first novel. And so now about Michelle, her daughter. Michelle is the Fannie Hurst writer-in-resident at Brandeis University and teaches at GrubStreet, where she leads the Novel Incubator program. She is a 2014 NEA Fellow and has been a writer-in-residence at Bucknell University, a MacDowell Fellow, and a winner of the Penn New England Discovery Award. Her debut, The Quickening, was a 2010 Massachusetts Book Award must-read. Her latest novel, Bottomland, is a 2017 All-Iowa Read selection. And Randy Susan Meyers is an internationally best-selling author of 5 novels and a co-author of a book on parenting. Her books have been designated one of the top 10 best works of fiction in multiple years by the Massachusetts Center for the Book. Her novels have been translated into more than 26 languages. Randy loves to read books about social issues. She has tended bar, run a summer camp, resurrected a community center, and worked with batterers and victims of domestic violence. Randy lives in Boston with her husband, where she teaches writing at the GrubStreet Writing Center. And then we also have other panelists here who you will hear from, Diane, Sue, Mark, and Emily. And so without further ado, I will turn the event over to you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I'm just going to start off with a short reading of the book, and you also hear from my mother in a pre-recorded reading. And I hope that functions okay. And then we'll turn it over to Randy for questions, and then to our readers to talk about their own thoughts as well. So I'm just going to read from the beginning of the book just so you get a flavor of it. It starts with a chapter called Bankruptcy. And it starts, most of the book is told from Ruth Ann's younger point of view, but the beginning of the book kind of sets up the authorial narrative voice that is the older person looking back. And so she begins, all that morning in a room heaped with our mother's belongings, not a word was spoken about our childhood. The barren floors and ghosts of pictures that once hung on the walls quieted the 4 of us as we sorted through what our mother had left behind. Some as inconsequential as newspapers and magazines, others as personal as a print dress with her scent and a trace of flour or bacon grease. She had died on March 1st. Our older brother reminded us that it was moving day. Growing up in rural Iowa, still shadowed by the Great Depression, we knew about moving day. March 1st had often marked our lives, moving as we did from rented farm to rented farm but our stories about life on those farms were built on their names. Edward, die. Notes were given to 2 of our moves, and we told no stories about those places, at least not in our parents' lifetimes. In mid-March, shone mercilessly through the windows on things not eligible for an estate or garage sale, cookbooks, recipes from church friends, mismatches, figurines, and phonograph records. Occasionally, there were surprises. In a jumble of dime store and jewelry were 2 fine brooches. From Aunt Belle, no doubt, my sister declared. I held up an old slate. Remember this? My brothers were more likely to dig out or an old license plate. Why would she keep these? And I'm going to let Mom and a little bit there. Excuse me for
my screens show little interest about these person, especially in dealt with what had gone. Or was I the only one who later hated from the tumbled remnants of my mother's life? I was faded, snaky as a 4-year-old standing on the always called. I had seen this photograph many times, but now with a lot. I see a meaning back in 1934, something on that porch that must be it all began. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oops. I'm trying to unshare my screen, but it's not happen. And to let you guys hear a little bit of my back to time is thinking back to happened on GAN, and I'll continue with that. Picture me, my 4-year-old self, grabbing my stuffed kitty. My grand drove into our lane, barefoot onto the porch, ignoring the carpet of dust. My mother had not yet away. Beyond the maple tree leaf, grandmother in the passenger seat turned to her husband. My grandfather opened the carpet, sat for a moment, closed the door, thinking of something else, and crossed the dry grass house, run to him. The strong man I knew quick swing me high in his arms. My grandfather reached for the porch rail, and his knuckles went wide. He stood rooted to the lower step. His straw dress hat shadowed his eyes. His shoes showed scuff marks. Many a Saturday night I had watched him polish his shoes for Sunday church before he saw to it that I polished mine. But this wasn't Sunday. My grandmother was not one for waiting. Giving the car door a quick shove, she brushed past her husband and with barely a glance at us, bounded up the steps. My mother, holding my baby sister, had just stepped outside. My grandmother was also dressed in her Sunday best, the dark crepe she wore summer and winter, and the little hat with its wispy veil, but she was not wearing her Sunday face. What she had come to say had nothing to do with church. She probably wanted to lambaste my father, but as usual, he and my brother Frankie were off somewhere in the truck. So it was my mother whose face fell apart at my grandmother's words, sharp as pointed sticks. Well, it's gone. This farm we paid good money for. The bank took it away. 80 acres from us too. Tell that husband of yours what he cost us. My mother did not move for the bungalow's doorway. Her apron, stained with baby burp and breakfast grease, seemed to pull down at her narrow shoulders. She brushed a dark sheaf of hair away from her face and boosted my baby sister higher in her arms. Dan tried. Sure he did, my grandmother said, when he wasn't running around. My mother said nothing. My grandfather's voice came from a low place. Delia, that's enough. I had never heard him call my grandmother that anymore. He turned from the porch, his feet dragging across the parched grass. He climbed into his dusty nash and sat, head bowed and waiting. My mother was almost as tall as my grandmother, but standing there in the porch, she shrunk under my grandmother's gaze. I squeezed Kitty more tightly. Nothing moved, not even a leaf on the maple tree my parents had planted the first year of their marriage. My grandmother didn't move either. Her eyes were locked on my mother and baby sister. Slowly, the anger drained from her face. Without a word, she turned and left. And I'm going to give you one more taste of Mom, and then we'll get on with the discussion.
Did that really happen? Through all these years, no one talked about it. I looked again at the snapshot of me on the bungalow porch, holding a toy made by a kinder grandmother, following the birth of my baby sister. But I do remember my grandmother dropping snide remarks against my father over the years. I also remember Frankie's story about our father telling our grandfather, there is no money, I can't pay the mortgage. Then there were the images of my parents loading chairs, bedspreads, and mattresses onto my father's truck to drive to a square red house close to the railroad tracks, where the gardens and pots shriveled and died. The following year, we loaded those chairs and tables again, still scarred from the first move to live on another farm far away. But that was how things were before those stories about my father and other women started. Before that terrible threshing accident convinced my mother to do something that sent my neighbors to their homes and kept the party line buzzing years later. I'm still not sure whether my mother's action was foolish, courageous, or just desperate. Yeah.
How do you like it?
Good. My goodness, I wrote, and I go through this and I wrote that.
So I just thought that was cute. And I don't know if you guys can see in this picture, but she's got a pillow behind her head that says Nana, because that's what my nieces call her. She's also got a picture of her mother behind her right here on the shelf, and her famous instant Folgers coffee that she insists on all the time. It's the only thing that she drinks. So, all right, let's get to it. I did want you guys to get some sense. And for some reason, I always get stuck on this page. But Randy, why don't you go ahead while I try to get out of this?
Okay, so first of all, thank you everybody for being here. And when people ask you to do a blurb as an author, it's always a little heart sinking because, oh, what if I don't like this? What if, but I do have to write it because, blah, blah, blah. especially if it's somebody you know or a friend, and you always want to do something good. And then when Michelle was asking on behalf of her mother, I felt like, oh, look at me, the angel of this century, writing this blurb for Michelle's mother. Shame on me. I open up the book and start reading, and I was so captured, so captured. This book, everybody who's out there, all 58 or whatever of you, buy this book right now. This book, one of my favorite books in the world, and I wrote this in the blurb, is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Reading this book took me to that book in a way that no other book has since. And this speaking as a girl from Brooklyn, it was as though that strong, true voice was brought into Iowa during the Depression. So Michelle, thank you so much for letting me have the extreme honor of blurbing this book.
Oh, that's so sweet.
I've been proselytizing all over the place. Now, my first question to you is, you published this book for your mom. How did this come to be? That's fascinating.
Yes, and by the way, I am seeing your notes about my internet connection. I'm really sorry about that. So, but I hope it got better and you're able to hear the book and hear her. So, it really happened. This, you know, she's been working on this book. She's been writing ever since my father died. When he died when I was 14, which is kind of when I started writing as well. And she started working on other pieces, poetry, and then she started working on little short stories that eventually she decided could become a novel. And so she's been actually working on this for several decades. And I had read parts of it throughout, and you know, helped her with that. And she tried to shop it around with agents. Honestly, I think it's very difficult. And Randy, I know that you've heard about this from some other fellow older women writers too, that sometimes publishers just aren't interested in publishing an older writer, particularly as a debut writer. So I think she just had trouble. I got caught up in my own life and my own, you know, writing, and she's always been so helpful with that. This fall, she has a chronic cancer condition, and so this fall it actually came back, and she had to go on some medicine, and the medicine really played with her memory, and so we were really in danger of losing her this fall. And I thought, well, good God, Michelle, you know, get your butt in gear and get this book published for her. So, so I worked on, she had little pieces that were on digital file, and she had all these printouts. She had several different versions of each chapter. I wasn't quite sure what even was the most recent version. So I had to kind of read through and kind of guess lots of times what the most recent version was. And then I was able to piece it together and self-publish the book for her, which I've never done, which is a lot of work. I don't necessarily recommend it for people. It's a lot of work, but Ingrid Spark does put out beautiful books, and I wanted my mother to have a hardcover book. And I also paid for a designer to do the cover. So it actually turned out to be a quite beautiful book, and I wanted that for her to be able to hold. And the inside of it is just kind of cool because you can design the inside too. So I thought that was nice. Yep, that's how it came about.
Well, I'm glad it did, because you ended up doing what a mitzvah, a Yiddish word meaning a blessing, not just for your mother, but for readers all over. I mean, I think this book will just move on there. Did you know from, I'll put this question together. Did you know from the beginning of her journey that she was publishing this novel? And how much do you consider it based on her life and your grandparents?
I asked her that, and I even asked her, I said, well, why did you ever consider writing a memoir or nonfiction? And she said, well, I like fiction. And so she decided to write in fiction. And there are some pieces, like the threshing accident that's in this book is not something that actually happened with her or with her family. Though the part of the book where one of the families, one of their neighbors holds a gun on her father, is a part of the book. And the part of the book where her uncle goes racing to try to get to the family reunion in time, and the aunt is spilling the pot of beans from her lap, which is kind of an hilarious scene. My mother was I was surprised at the funny scenes. Some of those I hadn't read before. So a lot of those, it layers in fiction, it layers in nonfiction. It's stuff that I do with my own work as well. And actually in real life, my grandmother did leave her husband for a while to try to, she just got tired of him, all these rumors of him running around. And so she decided she was going to just be on her own and do her own thing and run a boarding house in real life, it was 5 children. And in the book, it's 4. And I've always heard that story and just thought, well, what gumption does that take to try to do that? It made me really proud of my grandmother to be like, hey, if you're not going to behave, I'm going to leave. That's the true core of the book.
The book has a universality that I think comes from the very best fiction that is sort of a journey of youth. Like I've been thinking about my own grandmother who told my grandfather if he didn't stop drinking and leave his job as a bartender, she was going to leave him. I mean, there are things between Iowa and Brooklyn that connect so incredibly. The thing about your mom's book that's reminiscent of your own writing, Michelle, is it's so clear. It has that clear simplicity that is some of the hardest writing to do, so that the reader goes straight through to the story. There's no stumbling on any of the writerliness. So do you feel like your mom affected your writing? Do you feel like there's some real connective tissue there? So what do you think you learned from her?
Yeah, and a lot of it is also about the way we were raised. Humility was a big thing. There wasn't any sort of pretentiousness. Simple language was always simple, straightforward language was always preferred. And also she grew up with her family telling stories. They would get together around meals and tell stories and play guitars and sing songs. And I, as a child, was able to listen to that as well, and listen to these. They were mostly tall tales. They were just these wild stories. And so just kind of the joy of being able to tell a story. And those were a lot of oral storytelling skills. And those stories really have to pay attention to the audience and really have to keep the language simple in order to get the meaning across. I probably needed to relearn that actually when I started writing, because I think I got my head too big and went to graduate school and was reading all this complicated stuff. And so when I wrote, I had to kind of go back to the simple nature of the form that worked. I think my mom might be better at it actually. Yeah, there was just a lot from her, and just the way it's written in the voice. It's just about, to me, the way I was raised, the way my brother and I and my sister and I were all raised, is just kind of a sensibility that we kind of carry with us because of her and my father.
Well, one of the reasons I suggest, I'm going to sound like such a shill, that not only all the readers out there, but all the writers out there get this book, because your mom really knows, probably instinctively, how to make sure that the language and the writing serve the story. The story did not serve the writing. And for that, I applaud her so much. So I'll ask a final question before we open it up to the panel. You acted as your mom's editor. How was that to take off your daughter hat, put on your editor hat, put back on your daughter hat? Were you able to separate and then become the editor, looking without the scrim of all the love that you have? I mean, you still love.
Yeah, it's difficult because again, because there were so many versions of each chapter, I felt like I had kind of had to read my mother's mind. And when I was really piecing it together, that was at a point when she really was not doing well, so I couldn't ask her. And of course, on the phone, you can't say, "Oh, the file is da da da. Is that the most recent?" Like she's not going to know. So, and then, you know, as an editor and as a copy editor, what really can you fix, or what should you let sit? I think is the hardest thing. And I don't oftentimes, when I teach, I normally do much bigger picture lessons in terms of storycraft and in terms of structure and characterization. So I don't normally do the fine sentence stuff that editing takes. Honestly, I didn't have to move around a whole lot. Like in this first chapter, that last paragraph of the first chapter was actually the first paragraph of chapter 2. So that was probably the biggest change I made in the whole book. I'm like, no, that needs to be in the end of chapter 1. And there was some other language things that sometimes I trimmed down. But for the most part, this is hers. You know, she made it easy.
Good on you, because your mother's voice imbues this book. When you talk about voice in teaching, which you know we do, this is Lorraine Hoover's voice, and God. So rather than me babbling on, which I can do, I want to open it up to the panelists. Just open it first and give them what made you fall in love with this book, because I know you did. So Sue, you want to speak? You're a friend of Lorraine's. So that's really exciting.
2 years ago, I became a neighbor to Lorraine Hoover. And we became acquainted right away. And unfortunately, I don't know her as well as I would like to. But for those of you who don't know her, she's a very cool person. What I love about this book is that although it's universal, it's a very pure and authentic rural Iowa portrait. I am a longtime Iowan. I came here from suburban Chicago when I went to college, and I stepped into what turned out to be a totally different culture for me. And that is the culture of this book, the Iowa rural culture, and the values of the people and the behavior of the people and the details of their lives. You know, all those mashed potatoes with gravy. I mean, really. And we could talk more about those values, but that's what I loved about the book, that I could relate to it so completely in that way.
That is so great, Sue. Thank you. And it's so nice to know that you saw it as, you know, relating to your life living there, and I found it relating to my life living nowhere near there. So kudos to Lorraine.
Right.
Mark, Emily, Diane, who wants to start?
I'll say something, because picking up on what you said, Randy, because it really echoed my experience with the book. I didn't know what to expect, and I found myself, the writing, the details are so precise, and it feels simple, but it's deceptive because this world is captured so well, and I felt like I was in it. And I found myself remembering like Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings and people I read when I was younger that I just adored. And it gave me that same feeling, and it sort of brought back my own childhood, even though I didn't grow up on a farm in Iowa. And I haven't read a book that did that for me in quite that way. And I found, you know, I love poetry, and there's a quiet poetry to this book. You know, just line after line, I kind of noted that I just loved. But she's also a great storyteller, like in the tradition of like a yarn spinner. Like this story just keeps you going, and it's very moving. I mean, I got to the end. I mean, I'm kind of at this point in my life, nothing makes me cry. And I got to the end of this book, and like I was like, tears were in my eyes. It's just, I really hope everybody reads it. I'm in Randy's camp with that.
They have to.
They have to.
One of the things that I loved about it that caught me from the beginning is the presence of music throughout the book. And I'm a pianist who played my entire life. And when I very early on when looking at her mother's old copies of Etude magazine, and we discover that she's a pianist. And but then there's the singing and playing piano at church that happens, and there's Sarah's piano ability and how that gets affected by her situation, whether she can't touch a piano for a year because of all of the turmoil that's going on in her life. The book touches on race issues in Iowa at the time, and we hear about Ruth Ann's not ever meeting, not knowing any Black people other than the Black people that come and sing in the church. So again, there's this tie-in with the music, and I just appreciated every time we were brought back to thinking about the music that was happening all throughout this time of the Great Depression. And it wasn't all depressing. It was people were still singing and playing piano. And
building on what Emily and Diane just said, I agree with everything they said about the use of detail is amazing in this book, and it has a incredible authenticity about this place. And what is also great about it, and the way the small town life is depicted in the book, is layered on top of that. You have the Depression, as Diane said, and it's instant pressure for all of these characters, because life was hard enough as it was without the Depression, then bam, you get the Depression on top of that, and everything just becomes impossible or close to impossible. One aspect of that I thought was really well done in the book was the sort of inescapability of opinion of people in the town. You cannot escape Mrs. Olson in this book. Mrs. Olson is one of the judges who are passing judgment on you and your family, and you can't get away from that. And Lorraine really captures that well. A few chapters into the book, there's this chapter called A Saturday Night, and Ruth Ann is exposed to these adult experiences. You start to get a sense of something's not quite right with my dad in terms of the relationship with her mom, but it's the Mrs. Olson who appears as sort of like this authority figure who's passing judgment. And I thought that was really well described in the book. So it's the small town detail and the loving sense of detail, plus the Depression on top of that, and the way that kind of amplifies the effect of the people in the town and their effect on the family is terrific.
Go ahead, Diane.
Building on that, I found exactly the same thing, the idea that there's always the judgment and the gossip and everything else. But one thing that I found heartbreaking and that really struck me was they've got the whole Depression is happening, but to them, they don't necessarily know what this thing called the Depression is. And I found this sense of looking for someone to blame. So it's, instead of blaming the overarching economic situation of the whole country and the whole world, we're going to pick on Dan, Ruth Ann's father, and we're going to blame him for losing the farm instead of examining it. And then we're going to blame the people in line for the relief with a capital R to get their food, and say you need to go back to the farm, back to your husband, instead of sympathizing with someone who's lost everything. And I just found that's so correctly depicted in the book, just this thought of instead of being an empathetic society, we're looking to just blame those who find themselves in a situation. And Lorraine depicted that just beautifully.
I think building on that, it also captured really well what it's like to be in a situation where you don't know that things are going to work out, where every week, every day, their challenges arise that can totally pull the rug out from under you. And, we've just gone through this pandemic where I think some of us, myself included, have faced feelings of adversity that I probably never felt in my life, and you know, multiply that times 100 on what's going on in Milk Without Honey. I mean, they literally, you know, face, you know, they don't know if they're going to have their next meal. They don't know if they're going to have a home. It's cold, you know, all these things that are very basic that I think, you know, you don't realize, and people struggle with this every day now, and you get removed from it. And it really treated that honestly and with humility and in a way that you felt like you were right there. And it opened my eyes, actually, in many ways.
And when you hear it from a child, it opens your eyes in a different way, I think.
Sue, I'm curious, since you are there living, is the book being passed around in the neighborhood, in the area? Are people aware of the book? Is the word being passed around?
Oh, that's to me. It's a brand new book. It just came out. I just learned about it. I ordered it, and so we're just beginning to get acquainted with it. And hopefully it will be passed around.
The problem is a lot of the senior living facility, they can't really mix, and they can't go in and out of the main building, and there's just so many restrictions.
There have been really,
yeah, with this whole thing, like my mother, we hadn't been able to see my mother for months because she was isolated in her room at the healthcare center after she had some really bad falls. So she hasn't been able to kind of enjoy that community feel, but we have gotten free copies to them. So her nurses have all read it.
Oh,
and
good.
People at the front desk have all read it.
Oh, good.
And so, yeah, there's definitely a lot of copies floating around Northwest. They just haven't been able to kind of get together in a group and talk
exactly. I think I'll buy a couple of more and pass them out. Why not?
Well, if there's anybody out there in the audience in the field of newspapers, especially in South Dakota, let's get an article written about this.
Yeah.
This is pretty damn newsy, okay? Great book, great community. Let's get this going. Michelle, how much was your family involved in the project, and how excited are they about it?
They were very excited about it. You know, I moved to Cyprus in December, and the last time I've been able to see my mother in person was in October. During this time, because she had a few falls, she had decided to move into the main building of Northcrest. And so I was able to help out a little with that moving process, but for the most part, it's been my sister and my brother that have been driving back and forth from Colorado to Iowa to move her. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that because they were doing that work, and because I was sitting in Cyprus, just trying to think, what am I doing? You know, they released me to be able to have time to do this. And it did take a long time. I was rather obsessive about it, basically for 2 months. The problem is when you self-publish a book, it's just kind of you. I didn't have any other editor that I could hire. Well, I could have, but I didn't have time. I felt I was really short on time. So I probably read the book through about 7 times at the end, just to make sure there weren't any mistakes. And my husband eventually had to stop me. He's like, you need to stop rereading this book. It's done. It's ready to go. I mean, it's you know, you put something out not only into the public, but for your mother, and you're like, there can't be a spelling mistake here. There can't be a repeated word. That was probably the hardest part in the whole process, is that anxiety of making a mistake in the text.
I can imagine. Well, you should be so proud of yourself. You've done such a wonderful thing, and oh, I love this book. I see we have some questions out there, but Diane, panelists, do you have anything to say before we move to the Q&As in the audience?
I guess I would just reinforce the universality of the book. I read it at the same time that I was reading Shuggie Bain, which won the Booker Prize this last year. And on the surface, it would seem like very different books. But it's a young boy with an alcoholic mother in Glasgow in the 1980s. But yet, from the child's point of view, with a mother who's struggling to survive on her own, and both books just bring to bring to the surface the possibility a lot of the times of a woman being single and trying to survive. And I just found it had the same kind of charm, and I enjoyed reading both of them at the same time. But it's very universal, different time period, different part on earth, but yet still tells that story.
Yeah, I read Sugar Bean, a lot of connective tissue. By the way, is there any plans for an audiobook, Michelle?
Not yet. I was just able to get the hardcover and the ebook. And I hadn't thought about doing an audiobook. We would have to hire someone to do it.
Oh no, you should
I
sell
think when
it.
I was finally, yeah, I mean, I would like to, and I'd like to also put out paperback, just because, you know, we're not making any money on this book. I priced it so that people could buy it, but it's a hardcover, and hardcovers are expensive. You know, it's kind of, when you do a book like this, I designed the inside myself, which might have been a mistake. And then you try to upload it to Ingram Spark and they tell you there's a problem. I mean, I don't know how many times I had to upload the damn thing. And also with the cover, you just have to get, everything just has to be right. And they were saying, oh, there's color in this. And I'm like, there's no color in this. And so it became a little bit of a nightmare. At one point, I kept trying to contact Ingram Spark, their help people. And at one point it said, the wait time for help is 38 days. I thought, like, how is that possible? I need to get this book done. So it's not easy road. All those people that are self-publishing out there, you know, holy cow, it's a lot of work to do.
It's a lot of work. Well,
Goodreads.
Somebody wrote like the wait time for a vaccination appointment. That's funny.
Yeah, it's
Thank you, Suzanne. You're right. So I don't know if Emma is out there and she wants to manage the Q&A. If not, hi Emma.
Hello.
How you doing? How you doing, honey?
I'm fine. I was just creeping in the background. I can certainly ask the questions if you want. Let me just pop on through here. So I see one right towards the bottom and I'll scroll up. So if you sent one earlier, don't worry, we'll get to it. Michelle, how long did it take you to piece together and edit the book? Sorry if you already answered this, says Andrea.
Yeah, so I answered a little bit, but it was really nonstop for probably a month or two of just reading through, trying to figure out what version of the chapter that she wanted. And then again, my anxiety of making any mistakes. And I also want to point out, I had a number of friends who are absolutely, absolutely wonderful, including Randy, that were able to offer blurbs of the book. And blurbs of the book come from all over the country, including my friend Kate Southwood in Norway, E.B. Moore, who's a writer in Maine, Steve Bieber, who's a friend in Boston. Michelle Janning is a friend from Ames, actually, from when I went to high school. Kevin McAvoy is an incredible writer out in the Southwest, and Denis Bouchard and Grace Toulousan, Greg Brown, Patty Horvath, Maya Lang, just all wonderful people that blurbed the book. And I feel like when I read their blurbs that they weren't doing it just because it was my mom's book. I don't know. I hope, you know, it really seemed like there was a lot of positive energy coming out. And I was just so happy that people were able to enjoy it and that they were so generous. You know, that's the part of the writing community in Boston that I've gotten used to, is a real generosity among writers. And I was so glad that I was able to share that for my mother's project as well.
Awesome. Okay, so we have some questions in our like actual Q&A section. So Roxanne says, hi, Michelle.
Hi, Roxanne.
Pam says, Michelle, what are your recollections of your grandmother? And did your mother have a writing group?
My grandmother died when I was in college. before that, she was rather a quiet woman. So the same personality that you see in the book, she was much more quiet, withdrawn. She did always play the piano. She was very musical in that way, but she was much more quiet. And I remember one time that, and she would giggle. So sometimes I would sit with her and I would just be babbling on the way kids can babble, and she would just giggle. And I just remember that kind of with that delight. She had a very kind of light, girlish giggle where you could really see her youth there. And I didn't get to know her as much deep down, really having like really adult conversations with her is the way I want to. But just her kind of quiet presence and her love was always there. So I was at least had a chance to have that. My mother did have a writing group. She had a writing group both in Arizona and in Ames. She was pretty ferocious when she had to kind of, my father died and her whole life was kind of built on him, and she had to kind of refigure, well, how do I live now? And this is what she did. She started to write, and she started making connections with other writers, and wonderful connections with people that she's still friends with today. She hasn't been able to see a lot of them for a while now because of the pandemic, but we're all going through that. But they were very supportive of this project. They've seen parts of this project for years and years and years. So I think they'd be very happy to see this book coming together for her.
Michelle, every time I ran into your mother, she was going to her writing group.
Yeah.
She was passionate about it. I think she loved the social part of writing too.
Yeah. And that's what's been so hard for her with the pandemic and for all of us. Yeah. So.
We've got another question here from Elizabeth. She says, hello, Michelle. So exciting to see you. For everyone listening, she spent 6 months traveling the world with Michelle on Global Semester. Oh, cool. Can you tell us what is on the horizon for you, professionally speaking? More books on the horizon? Also, top 3 most difficult aspects of self-publishing. That is a lot.
So that's for my friend Nida. I always call it Elizabeth Nida. Elizabeth, you know that. For me, I have a book that's out now with editors. It's about a woman in the 1940s who became known as the mother of forensics. And so it's based very loosely on her life. And she also, she became really quite famous for making dollhouses out of crime scenes. So the book is a culmination. It's a fictional biography of her life, as well as including stories that the doll scenes were based on. And for some reason during the pandemic, I keep starting different projects. So I've started 3 different novels here and I just need to stick with one, but I'm kind of just letting myself follow wherever the energy is taking me. So, and they're all extremely different from each other, but that's just kind of fun. And so other writers out there are able to also just let themselves follow wherever the creative energy is taking them. My mom took a long time to get this book right, to get it perfect. And you'll see that when you read it. It really, it's kind of perfect. I mean, yes, I'm her daughter, and so I might be biased, but it feels like this perfect nugget. It's not a long book, it's only about 200 pages, but she was able to shape it because she took her time with it. This is what she spent just so much of her energy doing. And so, and published for the first time when she's 90 years old. So I hope all of you out there, I know there's a lot of writers out there, I hope you just keep continuing and keep writing, because you might make your own perfect nugget yourself that gets readers excited as well.
It is a perfect book, and you're not prejudiced.
No, it's perfect.
And Nida also wanted to know the 3 most difficult things about self-publishing.
Yes.
It's expensive. I can submit this book to contests, which we plan to do, but each contest costs $100 to $150 to submit to. So they're making a lot of money off of writers' dreams, a whole lot of money. which is what one negative, I guess. It's complicated. It takes a long time to figure it all out and get everything patterned and figure out which even venue to publish through. And it's just exhausting because once you get the book all perfect and you've read it through 10 times, then you have to do the promotion. And actually my main goal was, I need to get this book in my mother's hands. That was my number one goal, so that she could hold it and touch it. And then I was like, oh, now I need to I need to get the book in other people's hands as well. And of course, I want many people to read it as possible, but my first goal was just to do it for my mom. And so I'm so glad that it still has continuing energy and is being read by a lot of people.
Heck yeah. Elizabeth also says, thanks, Michelle. Awesome. It looks like someone has their hand up, Juliet Faithful. I don't know if she meant to do that, but it is possible. Oh, she put her hand down. Okay, that's fine. I just, in case she wanted to ask a question, that would have been fine. But if we have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or in our Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, Randy, if there's anything else you'd like to ask, feel free, or any of the other panelists. We've got time.
One of the things that I wanted to think about was the whole thing, like when your mom was looking for an agent or an editor, how old was she at that point, do you think?
In her late 70s, I think.
It is such a shame. I mean, some of you know that I've written an ongoing, I haven't updated for a while, column on my website on, I got really angry. There was a New York Times yearly thing that was going, maybe you remember, Michelle, the guy who wrote it, like blazing new writers under, 18 years old or whatever it was, writers under, and so I said, okay, I'm going to write writers who wrote their first debut over 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. And some amazingly famous people fit into that. One that comes to mind was, oh my God, the brain does get old. Little House on the Prairie, Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Yeah.
Started much later in life. A Ship of Fools, who wrote that?
Catherine Ann Porter.
Catherine Ann Porter. I think she was 70 something when she came. I mean, there's a ton of them. So, and in my writing group, there's a woman who published for the first time in her 70s. And my first book came out when I was 57. So I think that's something very interesting to think about, because writing is something I think age brings, can make a lot better.
Absolutely.
Norman MacLean was 76. Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. So how did your mother cope with that, Michelle? That feeling of coming up against?
I think it was just very, and she also she wasn't an insider to the writing world. I mean, in teaching the Novel Incubator program that I do, I'm really lucky to work with a lot of older writers, which I actually prefer, because their writing is so good. They're so smart. They're also very generous with their time. They're tenacious. It's just an incredible group of people to teach for. And I've taught a lot of college students and university students, and they've been fabulous as well, but I do prefer the older writers. But there is an ageism. I mean, God, we saw that in the pandemic, oh, let's just let our old people suffer and we'll be fine. And it's really too bad that the idea that, and it's a lot of elitism too, because how many people when they're young can really, do they really have time to be writing and spending the amount of time writing that it takes to get a first novel out? They need to work, they have kids, they have other family obligations. A lot of the students that I work with, particularly women, put everything aside to raise their children, and then we're finally able to turn their lives over to write, and finally able to do this for the first time, but they're still kind of locked out of that world because they didn't go to an MFA school or a cool MFA place to make connections there, and then have hard time not being the sexy young thing. getting the attention from publishers. And it's a real disappointment because I think we are losing a lot of amazing stories by those older writers simply being overlooked.
And just to make sure people out there feel also that things can work out. I always say when I'm doing large events or small events, I am here to make you feel better because I published my first novel at 57, and now I've done 5. It can happen, but you have to work twice as hard. It's sort of like in order to get there, you have to do so much more. And it was a big concern for me. I was terrified of my first event, like, oh my God, how will I look as young as possible? I wasn't even gonna try for sexy. I just wanted to look good. And I think it's something that people are afraid of. They're afraid of age, as though if they stay away from it, they won't get old. Which, newsflash, you still will. But I think this book says so much about a lot. And here's another piece of it, Michelle, that's really interesting, because this book should
And
be.
also, her book is absolutely pitch perfect of a young girl named Ruth Ann. Like, it's a pitch perfect young woman. And that's the thing that about whatever age you are, the beautiful thing about writing is you're ageless when you're writing, and if you're a good writer, you can slip into any generation. And I think that, it just makes me really angry if doors are closed simply based on any ism. It makes me very angry.
But look at what she did. Actually,
she did.
Michelle,
And she did.
Jane Gardam, Kathy Crowley, owner of the bookstore. What did she have to say? Emma, you want to read it to us? Let's see.
She was also older when she began to publish.
Jane Gardam, that's one of Kathy's favorite authors. I know that very much.
Hi, Kathy.
Is Kathy there somewhere? Hi, Kathy.
We have one more question in our Q&A section from Pam. She says she was blown away by the crispness and tautness of the scenes. They were transportive and did the work of always moving the story forward. Was this part of your editing?
Yeah, I did that. That wasn't there. No. No. That's all me. No, that's Mom. I mean, again, she worked on this for a really long time. She did the work. She was involved in writing groups. I sometimes think I've worked with all ages of writers, and I think sometimes the younger writers just think that they are instantly going to get published, and then they get really down when they don't. And I normally tell writers, it'll take 10 years. It'll take at least 10 years from the point where you start writing until you really are able to feel like you are through that gate and doing something. And for some people, it takes even longer. I wound up having once to tell a 70-year-old client, it normally takes 10 years. That's hard when you're telling a 70-year-old writer that it takes 10 years and they're just starting out. But typically it does take that long, because you're learning the craft, you're learning your own issues, you're learning your own triumphs. And so she put in that work, and she had readers, and she revised, and she was open to criticism, and she made an incredible story. And so a lot of it, I mean, again, there were some repeated scenes that I would cut out, or there were a couple things I moved around, but not really. I was pretty amazed that when I got it together, I'm like, oh my God, this is so solid. This is a really solid, beautiful, beautiful book. So it was easy after that. It was just my own anxiety about not, doing it right for her, right? Because she couldn't do it.
Well, you pulled it off beautifully. You really did. Can anybody tell that I love this book and want everybody to buy it and thinks it should be required reading in schools now?
Yes, I think it should be too.
Oh, John's talking about the character of Miss Nickel. Miss Nickel in the book, who's one of the, what I also love in the book is the bunch of characters that are in the boarding house. I think she does that so well. And when I was growing up hearing about this boarding house, I'm like, what is this boarding house? It was just kind of magical, like, ooh, you know. And Miss Nickel is this incredible character in the book who is such an individual, and is painted so well, and really helps Ruth Ann out as best she can to be a friend to her. I would read this book just for the characters in the boarding house alone. I mean, they're funny, they're weird, they're scary, they're inspirational. Yeah. Sue, you were going to say something?
Do you think this is an all ages book?
Oh, you mean for all readers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so. I would think so.
it is too. I think it is too.
Yeah.
And Mark, do you think it's a book that men will like?
I think it has a universality, as other people said, to it that transcends gender. And I think the view into this place at this time, especially as somebody else said, given what we've gone through in the last year, I think will resonate with a broad swath of readers.
It's next on my husband's reading list, so I'll let you know.
And another, building on Sue's question, another thing I really appreciated about it was the structure of the book, where they're moving around a lot, gives you this really kaleidoscopic view of this community. They're in the country, they're in the city, they're up by the levee, and they're picking up the brother from being drunk at the pool hall. And you really feel like by the end of the book, you understand so much about this society at this time. And it's part of it is just the structure of them moving around a lot. So you get an excuse to see these different environments, and the way that Ruth Ann sees the insides of these different houses and how that tells her so much about where they are in the state of their family.
It's like the difference between the town and the farm. It was so interesting,
Yeah.
you know, because the town, you know, it's just this tiny town, but it's so different than being out on the farm. And you know, I love that too. And I thought the male characters were very well developed. Like the father was sympathetic and deeply flawed at the same time. And he was a really well-rounded character. And the mother's relationship with him was very nuanced and not, you know, just driven by anger or love. It was a mixed thing, and they came. I don't want to give away the end, but I thought it was really well done.
Love the ever-present aunts and uncles. It's like they were everywhere, and each one had just a tiny bit of characterization, and you knew who that was. And we got to see so much on how they were part of this whole tapestry of growing up in a place like that. You had to have all the aunts and uncles, and that was really, really well done.
It's so difficult to do with your own family members. I mean, I personally, I think it's very hard to be able to see your own family members in a clear-eyed way, to fully characterize them on the page. But she got, I mean, these people were like this. These are the people that I knew growing up. And so she did that incredibly well. And she does it, you know, I would ask her questions. Actually, the interview that I had with her was longer, and she just kind of did it naturally, not even necessarily analyzing it that much, or thinking about it that much. Lots of my questions, she'd be like, well, I just did, you know. She would just do it. It was just so a part of her, and she got that so fully and clearly on the page.
We have one more question if you're up for it.
Yep.
It's from Juliet. She said, did your mom's example lead you to develop the novel Incubator?
Good question. That's a big question. Yeah, you know, I think that's interesting. I think in a way that I didn't really understand the idea of working with older writers and making sure that if a writer missed that opportunity of just going right from college into an MFA program, which most of our writers, actually, we have had a number of students that did MFA programs and then came to us afterwards because they didn't get what they wanted in the MFA program, so they come to us instead. But making sure that everyone does have the opportunity if they have the talent and the drive to be in the program, have the opportunity to make it. And actually, our first published writer out of the program, and I can't even keep count of how many published writers we've had in the program now, 20, I guess. I mean, I'm really losing count because they're just flying off the shelves. But our first published writer was E.B. Moore, and she published her first novel. She got a 2-book deal with a big publishing house, and she published that first book at the age of 72. And so that was a huge triumph for us. So yeah, I think just giving people a chance and giving people those connections and those opportunities, because otherwise it's very hard for a writer to find them in the world.
We've got someone again who has their hand up. Louise, I'm not sure if you want to like have your voice be heard or anything, or if you want to ask your question in the chat. But let me know. Nope, you don't want to be heard. Is that what that's answering?
She might just be saying hallelujah.
Yeah. Okay, she took it off. She took it off. That's fine. That's fine. We've had a few of those. That's okay. No, it's totally fine. Another question from Elizabeth Nida Obert. Regarding your writing, are you finding your time in Cyprus inspiring or distracting? Both, perhaps a backdrop for a future storyline?
Yeah, thanks, Nida. Yeah, no, I have one of the 3 books that I've started does take place in Cyprus, and takes place over 4 days in Cyprus, because being here during the pandemic has been interesting. Because the restrictions here are much more severe than in the States. We've actually, we have to send a text message to this text message system whenever we want to go outside and go out and do things. And we only have a certain amount of time to go out and do them, and you're supposed to stay in your district, and you can only do that twice a day. All the restaurants were closed completely except for takeout. They just opened up last week, and the fact that we were able to go out to eat in a restaurant and sit outside and have a glass of wine was spectacular. And we drank a lot of wine. Otherwise, to be in a place when all the meeting places are closed and everyone is staying inside and it's under curfew starting at 9 o'clock, so you can't actually talk to anyone. You're like, am I actually in this place? Am I actually living here? Does this count? And so just that idea of being kind of in this in-between world, and talking also about storytelling. Normally storytelling, we require action. We require forward motion. We require a journey. So is there still a story when your life is just repeat, when you're not allowed action, when you're not allowed that forward trajectory, and how does that still create a story, and what are the pressures of those two kind of storytellings? Why do we need a story of our lives? Why do we need that forward journey to feel that we are truly living? So that's what that book is about, and I'm exploring those ideas.
I was not off mute there. This was great, everybody. I don't know if anyone has any closing thoughts, but this was wonderful.
I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for being so supportive of this book. I know she's excited. I know that she's watching right now. Yeah. And so you can say hello to her. Hey, Mom, love you. And I just think that everyone in your support and your words and your voices. And I do hope people read this book. Again, we're not trying to make money off this book. This is not what we're trying to do. But I wouldn't mind getting the story out and around, and having people read it and know the book. And it's a beautiful book. I was able to get it done well. I'm proud of that. So thank you, everybody.
Tell her we're all fans. Like I am a fan, like totally.
We're super fans.
Super fan.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. Yeah, no problem. Thank you all. This was lovely.
Great job.
Emma.
No, oh my gosh, stop. Thank you guys. This was great. I hope we get to see you all here soon. We are doing many more events, so please feel free to join us on those as well. Thank you so much and have an excellent night, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.